This is the start of the second of our research and developmental psychology modules. We're going to be focusing mostly on data collection methods. Let's first review what we learned in the first module and where we're going in this particular module. Now that we have a research question to test, our hypothesis, and the population we will be sampling, we need to decide on how to collect data that will help us answer our research questions. This will include several approaches to data collection, including each approach's advantages and limitations. The first method that we are going to be exploring is that of verbal reports. Verbal reports consist of interviews, written questionnaires or surveys, and tests and scales that are designed to measure abilities or personality traits. All of these involve asking people questions either about themselves, such as in self-report measures, or about someone else, such as a child behavior report measure filled out by parents. While these are nice because they are quick and easy, they do have certain drawbacks or limitations. One of the big limitations is that you really can't use these with infants or young children, or for that matter any other individuals who cannot read or understand speech very well. You can see why this would be an issue, especially when regards to questionnaires and surveys. Next, you have the influence of social desirability. Social desirability is behavior that respondents believe would be approved by others. So if you are asking things about, say, adolescent sexuality and have you had sexual relations, people may respond to that they have when they actually haven't, because in that particular culture, maybe having sex, having been experienced, is viewed as a more positive attribute, and they would rather be viewed positively than actually tell the truth. So this is one of the issues that we see. Another one is the response bias. This is a tendency to choose the same response for all items. So when you have a scale, it would be somebody ticking off the very same answer, let's say a 3 on a scale of a 1 to 5, and they just check on 3s all the way down. A way to get around this is to alter the arrangement of the items to counteract this response bias, so that if a person's putting 5s for everything, you word a question that would have to be responded to as a 1. And this will hopefully reduce your response bias. And then you have bias in questioning. These are questions that are worded in ways to inspire one response over the other. A lot of political surveys are really good at doing the bias in questioning, and they can come up with totally different responses based on the way that they phrase a question. What we're going to see next is a biased survey question from a 7-Up commercial that I saw, and we will also be highlighting the independent and dependent variables in this particular slide. I think it's pretty humorous. You can let me know when you turn in your assignment what you think.
Welcome to the 7-Up blind taste test. Go ahead, try the other one.
This is rancid milk, man. What is that, dishwater?
Yes, it is. Next. Not as refreshing as 7-Up, is it? One left, more right.
You're sick, man.
Fresh squeezed this morning. See? 7-Up tastes better. Ah, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Next.
This is definitely a biased sort of questioning there. When you compare something like 7-Up with that of Chum and Bile, you're obviously going to get a result which is going to be favorable towards 7-Up. So this was a marvelous spoof on kind of the Pepsi Taste Challenge, but I think it also illustrates the danger of having question bias overall. Next, we're going to be moving on to archival research. Archival research is reviewing existing records to confirm a hypothesis. Now, there are some wonderful advantages to archival research, the chief one being that the data is already available, so you don't have to go scrounging out trying to find people to respond to your survey. Now, the limitation, of course, is that you can't ask all these different questions because your questions are restricted to the data that's already been collected. So that's wonderful if you find a data set that looks at the things that you're interested in answering, but a real drawback if you are interested in stuff that is not being asked. So archival research is very useful, but cannot always be used depending on the type of questions that you have been asking. Next is the case study. The case study is an in-depth and intensive investigation of an individual or small group of people. You tend to see these used in very low incident or difficult populations to measure. So for instance, in the medical literature, maybe somebody comes up with an exotic illness, something like you would see on the TV show House, and you don't exactly are able to go out and measure 500 people with this particular disease. So you do an in-depth case study and try to gain some sort of insight from that so that you can apply it to people in general or even those who maybe experience this disorder in the future. The limitation is fairly obvious as far as it's a very small size, and you really can't generalize the findings very well because individuals vary so greatly. Basing all of your conclusions on one individual is very difficult to say that's how it is in the regular population. A relatively new data collection method is the event sampling method. People carry a wristwatch beepers, and then the research will beep them randomly during the day so they can record their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. This is really neat, especially if you're trying to find out things like how adolescents spend their time and what exactly they're doing during those times. It's limited, though, based on the questions that you're asking, but it's yet one more weapon in the repertoire of researchers. Another one that is very specific focus but is used fairly frequently is called sociometric or sociometry. And that's a research method in which students rate social status of other students. The way it would work is you'd go into an elementary classroom and you would have a list of all the names there of the kids in the class, and you'd hand out the sheets. And one side it would say like to play or do things with this individual, and the other column would say do not like, and they would go ahead and endorse these, and from those researchers can construct what the social status is of a particular individual. The limitation here is that you can only really use it for social status and not too much else, so it's a very niche kind of data collection behavior. Okay, naturalistic observations, which is different than sociometry, looks at observing people in their common everyday settings. And in other words, it would be like parking in front of the library and observing how people interact. The advantage is it's really the only technique that can tell what children or adults do in everyday life. Most of the other settings we're either asking those people directly or we're observing them in some sort of artificial laboratory setting. And so the only really good way at getting at how people actually behave is with a naturalistic setting. Now, the problem is that some behaviors occur too infrequently and unexpectedly to be observed in this type of manner. So in other words, it's difficult to pinpoint the causes of the behavior when you're using this method. And sometimes the mere presence of an observer can sometimes make people behave differently than they would otherwise. Participant observation is the other part of a type of observation, and this is where you take part in the various activities with the people the researcher's interested in studying. So some of the studies on adolescents, what it sees is a researcher will embed themselves with the adolescents, such as enrolling in high school themselves, and that way they can even become engulfed in the culture and understand what the adolescents are going through. One of the most famous anthropologists is Margaret Mead, and she lived among people in Samoa and wrote very best-selling kind of anthropological studies of that population. A structured observation creates special conditions designed to elicit the behavior of interest, and you have a lot greater control over the conditions. Now, the advantage is this permits the study of behaviors that are rarely observable in naturalistic settings. and it increases the investigator's ability to compare the effect of a stimulus on different individuals. So an example is, it'd be opposed to just hanging out in front of a library. You have somebody, you want to see helping behavior, you have somebody that goes up and purposely drops all their books, and you look to see if the person's going to help, and you do the same thing several times with different people. You can have a much better way, or very just a much better insight into exactly what's happening. The limitation here is it's uncertain whether the conclusions from this type of research generalizes to behaviors in naturalistic setting. Anytime that you manipulate a setting, you just don't know if that's what would happen naturally or if somebody gets suspicious. You kind of see this when people say, "Am I on candid camera?" when things seem too contrived. The last of these data collection techniques that we'll be talking about are physiological measurements. Physiological measurements are something like heart rate and blood pressure, things that are really hard to fake and can be really useful, especially when studying infants, because you can't really measure and say, "Oh, how happy are you feeling now?" When they can't really say, "Oh, I'm a number 6 on a scale of 1 to 10. However, you can measure their physiological and get a much better idea that they have an increased heart rate when a certain behavior is happening. The limitation here is that you're not always sure what is being assessed. Increased heart rate could mean they're very angry just as well as they're very happy. And so it's a very imprecise type of measure, but can be complement to several of the other observational methods that we've used. Now, when we talk about advancing knowledge through the use of data collection and research, it tends to be advanced most when multiple methods are used to assess the same aspect of human development. So a combination of self-reports or verbal reports, and looking at behavior observations, and maybe even throwing in some things like event sampling or sociometry together. So let's take a minute and just kind of review some of those major data collection techniques that we just reviewed. Remember, verbal reports consists of not only questionnaires, but also surveys and tests and measurements of those sorts. Archival research looks at data that's already been collected. A case study, it looks at an individual. Event sampling is when people are notified via these kind of wristwatch beepers and given a time to write down what they're doing at that particular time. Behavior observations, either through naturalistic or more structured, kind of allow us to see what people actually do in everyday settings. And physiological measurement is used because it's very hard to fake or used with infants, but it can be imprecise. In Module 3, we're going to be talking about the various types of methods that we can use with these data collection techniques or in pure research, and those are the experimental method and correlational method.